So let's start at the beginning. Why do kids misbehave? Well, we know that about 10% of students have conduct problems. About 17% of kids have mental health issues like anxiety, depression, ADHD. And only 8% of students account for most office discipline referrals in schools. So statistically speaking, in a classroom of 30 students, there should be about 3 kids that drive you absolutely crazy, about 5 kids with depression or ADHD or anxiety, and then there's overlap in between those kids. And if we know this, why is it that every year we act so surprised? Why don't we make a plan? Why is it that so many kids have such challenging behavior, and what can we do about it? Many of you have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, the research from Dr. Vince Felitti in the 1990s. He was a physician and chief of Kaiser Permanente's preventative medicine department in San Diego. He was working in the obesity clinic at the time, and he was trying to figure out if there were certain traumatic events that could happen in a child's life that could lead to chronic diseases. He studied medical records and interviewed over 17,000 average Americans who had health insurance, and narrowed it down to 10 childhood traumas, what he called adverse childhood experiences that led to really negative outcomes. Not just chronic diseases, but also mental illness, more broken bones, more drug prescriptions, more marriages, employment problems like absenteeism, and even going to prison. He also found that if a person had one traumatic event, one ACE, there was an 87% chance that they had even more. For example, a person who had an alcoholic father was also likely to have experienced physical abuse. In other words, ACEs usually didn't happen in isolation. So how does this play out in a school setting? This is a risk path, and let's say we have a child, we'll call her Tina, who's about to experience some of the risk factors that Felitti identified. There are 10. Physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, a mentally ill or alcoholic parent, domestic violence, a parent who's been incarcerated, and losing a parent through divorce or abandonment. So Tina starts to develop some short-term negative outcomes, like being defiant because adults can't be trusted, lack of school readiness, coercive interactions, like being manipulative, because the only way to get mom's attention when she's passed out on the couch in an alcoholic stupor is to hit her little brother. And so she brings that problem-solving skill to school, where it doesn't go over very well. The maladaptive behaviors she develops include truancy, because she doesn't think you like her and she doesn't like you. Lots of discipline referrals. She moves a lot, so she attends a lot of different schools and gets involved with drugs and alcohol at an early age and even gets arrested. Then comes destructive long-term outcomes like school failure and dropout, drug and alcohol use, gang membership, violence, adult criminality, dependence on the welfare system, more injuries, more depression. In fact, the more ACEs that Tina has, the higher her risk. Things start getting serious around an ACE score of 4. People with 4 or more are twice as likely to smoke, 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic, and 12 times more likely to have attempted suicide. If someone has more than 6, their lifespan is shorter by 20 years. The severe and chronic stress of childhood trauma releases hormones that physically damage a child's developing brain. This is how pediatrician Nadine Burke-Harris describes it. If you're in a forest and see a bear, a very efficient fight or flight system instantly floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol and shuts off the thinking portion of your brain that would stop to consider other options. This is very helpful if you're in a forest and you need to run from a bear. The problem is when that bear comes home from the bar every night. Now, if you're into the neurology of it, the release of the stress hormone, cortisol, impacts the limbic system, the learning center of the brain, which includes the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self-regulation, planning, the hippocampus, which helps with learning and memory, and the amygdala, which is the emotional center. Many kids come to school unable to learn because they're trapped in a fight or flight stress response because of what they're exposed to in their lives. But there is hope. Just as there's a neurobiology of stress, there's also a neurobiology of trust, relationships, and connection, which is mediated by a hormonal cascade called the oxytocin cascade, the love hormone. One of the most important things about oxytocin is that it opposes cortisol. Relationships filled with trust are an antidote to the experience of stress. In other words, children's brains develop in response to the relationships and environments we expose them to. If our school is calm and supportive because we're predictable, consistent, and have safe relationships, we can actually help heal a child's brain. When kids misbehave, instead of teaching new behaviors and providing more support, many schools using traditional school discipline methods will exclude them from the classroom by sending them out to the hallway or to the office or suspend them from school. These exclusionary discipline tactics break relationships when we need to be creating them. The path of traditional school discipline is not working.